Seeing his newly born black baby, the white father was paralyzed. His wife immediately called him a racist. Welcome. Remember to subscribe and activate the notifications. Enjoy. The moment Daniel saw his newborn son, his world fell apart. The baby in his arms, with his deep brown eyes and dark curls, looked nothing like him. A single thought tore through his mind. This can't be my child. His heart pounded as he tried to process the scene before him. This was supposed to be one of the happiest moments of his life, the beginning of his journey into fatherhood. But all he felt was a cold, sinking dread. Daniel had always imagined what his firstborn would look like, a mirror image of himself, maybe with Laura's soft features or his own pale blue eyes. But the child he held bore no resemblance to either parent. The baby's dark skin and curly hair were impossible to ignore, a glaring contrast to the fair complexion and straight hair that defined Daniel and Laura. He felt the joy that had filled him moments earlier drain away, replaced by a wave of disbelief and confusion. The hospital room seemed to blur around him as Daniel turned to look at Laura. She was lying in the bed, exhausted but smiling, her eyes filled with love as she watched him hold their son. How could she be so calm? How could she not see what was right in front of them? Daniel's throat tightened, his mind racing with questions. He had trusted Laura with everything, believed in their marriage, their life together. Now, holding this child, he felt that trust slipping away, replaced by a gnawing suspicion that threatened to consume him. Laura's smile faded as she noticed the look on Daniel's face. Her eyes clouded with confusion, then concern, as if sensing the turmoil inside him. She called out to him, but her voice barely registered in his ears. Daniel was lost in his thoughts, staring at the baby, unable to reconcile the image before him with the life he thought he knew. The nurses moved around them, oblivious to the storm brewing in Daniel's mind. He felt their presence, their hands adjusting the blankets, their voices soothing, but they seemed distant, as if separated by a thick glass wall. All he could focus on was the small, unfamiliar face looking up at him, a face that felt like a stranger's. He wanted to say something, to ask Laura how this could be possible, but the words caught in his throat. Instead, he gently placed the baby back in the bassinet, his hands trembling. He turned away, his chest tight with a mix of anger and fear. He needed to think, to make sense of the emotions that were ripping through him. But how could he, when everything he had ever known felt like it was crumbling beneath him? The ride home from the hospital was silent. Daniel drove, his knuckles white on the steering wheel, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. Laura sat beside him, holding their son in her arms, her face a mixture of joy and concern. She tried to reach out to Daniel to share the happiness she felt, but he remained distant, his thoughts elsewhere. He couldn't shake the image of Noah's dark skin, the feeling that something was deeply, irrevocably wrong. Back at home, Daniel retreated to their bedroom, leaving Laura to care for Noah. He sat on the edge of the bed, his head in his hands, trying to process the whirlwind of emotions that had taken hold of him. Doubt gnawed at him, the question he had been avoiding since the moment he saw Noah echoing in his mind. Asterisk, could Laura have cheated on him? The thought was like a poison spreading through him, tainting every memory of their life together. He replayed their years of marriage in his mind, searching for signs, for anything that could have hinted at infidelity. But there was nothing. Laura had always been loving and faithful, their relationship strong and built on trust. He remembered their late-night talks, their shared dreams of the future, the plans they had made for their family. It didn't make sense. How could this child be the result of betrayal? But no matter how hard he tried to push the thought away, it kept coming back. The doubt, the suspicion, it was all consuming. Daniel knew he needed answers, needed to understand what had happened. He couldn't go on pretending everything was normal when his heart was filled with uncertainty. That night, as Laura slept beside him, Daniel lay awake staring at the ceiling. He listened to the soft sounds of the house settling, the quiet breaths of his wife and child, and felt a profound sense of isolation. He was supposed to be a father, a protector, but all he felt was fear. Fear of what he didn't know. Fear of what he might discover. The weight of it pressed down on him, making it hard to breathe. The next day, Daniel couldn't hold back any longer. He had to confront Laura, to ask her the questions that had been eating away at him since Noah was born. He waited until she was alone in the kitchen, preparing breakfast, before he approached her. His heart pounded in his chest, his palms sweaty with anxiety. Laura turned to him with a smile, but it faded when she saw the look on his face. She set down the knife she was using to cut vegetables, her eyes searching his. "What's wrong, Daniel?" she asked, her voice filled with concern. Daniel hesitated, his mind racing. He knew that once he spoke, there would be no turning back. The questions he was about to ask would change everything. But he couldn't keep the doubts to himself any longer. He needed to know. "Laura," he began, his voice trembling, "I need you to tell me the truth. Is Noah, is he really my son?" The words hung in the air between them, heavy with accusation. Laura's eyes widened in shock, her face paling. For a moment, she looked as if she hadn't heard him, as if the question was too absurd to comprehend. Then slowly, her expression hardened, a mix of anger and hurt. "How can you even ask that?" she said, her voice shaking. "Of course Noah is your son. How could you doubt that?" Daniel's hands shook as he tried to control his emotions. "Look at him, Laura," he said, his voice breaking. "He doesn't look like either of us. His skin, his hair, it doesn't make sense. I just need to understand. How can he be mine?" Laura stared at him, her eyes filling with tears. She looked down at the baby monitor on the kitchen counter, Noah's soft coos filling the room. When she spoke, her voice was cold, her words cutting. "You're saying that because of the way he looks, he can't be yours? You think I cheated on you?" Daniel didn't know how to respond. The accusation hung in the air, a mirror to his own worst fears. He wanted to deny it, to tell her he didn't believe she was capable of such a thing, but the doubt was still there, lingering, refusing to be silenced. Laura turned away from him, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Daniel watched her, feeling a wave of guilt and regret. He had hurt her, wounded her in a way he hadn't intended. But the questions wouldn't leave him, the need for answers overshadowing everything else. Unable to stay in the house, Daniel grabbed his keys and left, the door slamming shut behind him. He drove aimlessly, his mind a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions. He didn't know where he was going, only that he needed to escape the suffocating tension that had taken hold of his life. The following days were a blur. Daniel avoided Laura, spending as much time as he could outside of the house. He took long walks, sat in coffee shops, trying to find some clarity. But everywhere he went, he couldn't escape the image of Noah's face, the feeling of his world unraveling. Finally, after days of silence, Daniel decided he couldn't live with the uncertainty any longer. He had to know the truth, one way or another. He made an appointment with a doctor, explaining his situation, his fears. The doctor suggested a paternity test, a simple procedure that would provide the answers he sought. Daniel agreed, the weight of the decision settling over him. The test would either confirm his worst fears or put them to rest. Either way, he needed to know. He couldn't continue living in a state of doubt and suspicion. As he waited for the results, Daniel felt like he was walking on a knife's edge. His mind was a constant battle between hope and fear, the possibility of betrayal and the hope that he was wrong. He thought about Laura, about the life they had built together, the love they had shared. He wanted to believe in her, in their marriage, but the doubts were too strong. The day the results came in, Daniel's hands shook as he opened the envelope. His eyes scanned the paper, his breath catching in his throat. The words blurred for a moment, and then he saw it, the confirmation he had been hoping for. Noah was his son. Relief washed over him, but it was quickly followed by a crushing wave of guilt. He had doubted Laura, doubted his own child. He had let his fears and insecurities take over, driving a wedge between him and the people he loved. He had been so focused on his own suspicions that he hadn't seen the truth right in front of him. With the test results clutched in his hand, Daniel knew he had to make things right. He had to go back to Laura, to apologize, to try and repair the damage he had done. He had to face his fears and accept the truth. Noah was his son, and he had let his own prejudices cloud his judgment. As he drove home, Daniel felt a mix of fear and hope. He didn't know if Laura would forgive him, if they could ever go back to the way things were. But he knew he had to try. For Noah, for their family, for the future they had once dreamed of together. Back at home, Daniel's return was met with silence. Laura's face was a mask of pain, her eyes red and puffy from days of crying. She hadn't expected Daniel to walk out, hadn't thought he would doubt her so completely. But he had, and now their home, once filled with laughter and joy, felt cold and empty. Daniel tried to apologize, to explain his actions, but Laura's hurt ran deep. She listened to his words, but the betrayal lingered in her eyes. She didn't understand how he could question her faithfulness, how he could look at their son and see anything but the love they had shared. Noah was innocent in all of this, a baby who needed his father, and yet Daniel had abandoned them both. In the days that followed, Daniel kept to himself, haunted by the guilt of his actions. He stayed in the guest room, a silent acknowledgement of the rift he had created. Each night he lay awake, replaying his confrontation with Laura, the disbelief in her voice, the pain in her eyes. He had failed her, failed their son, and he didn't know how to make things right. Isolation became his refuge. He avoided Laura, avoided Noah, spending his days in a fog of regret. He took long walks through the neighborhood, trying to clear his mind, but the image of Noah's face was always there, a constant reminder of the mistake he had made. The doubt that had driven him was gone, replaced by a crushing sense of guilt. He knew he had been wrong, but he didn't know how to fix the damage he had caused. It was during one of these walks that Daniel ran into his brother Mike. Mike had always been the voice of reason, the steady hand that guided Daniel through life's challenges. He had been there when Daniel and Laura got married, had celebrated with them when they announced the pregnancy, and now, seeing Daniel's disheveled appearance, Mike knew something was wrong. "Daniel, what's going on?" Mike asked, concern etched on his face. He could see the strain in his brother's eyes, the weight of something heavy on his shoulders. Daniel hesitated, unsure if he was ready to talk about what had happened, but he couldn't keep it to himself any longer. He needed to tell someone, needed to release the burden that was crushing him. He poured out the whole story, from the moment he first saw Noah to the paternity test results. As he spoke, his voice trembled, his hands shaking with emotion. Mike listened patiently, letting Daniel get everything out, his own heart aching for his brother. When Daniel finished, Mike took a deep breath, trying to find the right words. "Daniel, I understand why you felt the way you did," Mike said slowly. "But you have to see that this isn't just about Noah's appearance. This is about your own fears, your own insecurities. You let those fears take over, and now you're paying the price. But it's not too late to fix things. You need to be honest with Laura. Tell her everything you've been feeling. You need to show her that you're willing to do whatever it takes to make things right." Daniel nodded, his eyes downcast. He knew Mike was right. He had let his own insecurities destroy the trust he had built with Laura, had let his fear drive him away from his family. But how could he fix it? How could he rebuild what he had broken? The answer came to him slowly over the next few days. He needed to prove to Laura that he was committed to their family, that he was willing to face his own fears and insecurities. He needed to take responsibility for his actions, to show her that he could be the husband and father she deserved. With a renewed sense of purpose, Daniel began to take steps toward reconciliation. He started spending more time at home, helping with Noah, trying to be present. He cooked dinner for Laura, small gestures to show her that he cared, that he wanted to make things right. He knew it wouldn't be easy, that it would take time to heal the wounds he had caused, but he was willing to do the work. One evening, as they sat at the dinner table, Daniel decided to open up to Laura. He spoke about his fears, his doubts, the way he had let his own insecurities cloud his judgment. He apologized for the pain he had caused, for doubting her, for doubting their son. His voice was raw with emotion, his eyes pleading for her understanding. Laura listened quietly, her expression unreadable. When he finished, she sat in silence for a long moment, her eyes fixed on the table. Daniel's heart pounded in his chest, the silence stretching on, heavy with uncertainty. He didn't know what he expected her to say, didn't know if she would forgive him, but he needed her to understand. Finally, Laura looked up, her eyes meeting his. There was still pain there, but also a glimmer of hope. She took a deep breath, her voice steady. She spoke of her own pain, the betrayal she had felt, the fear of losing him. She told him how much it hurt to see him walk away, to see him doubt their love. But she also spoke of her desire to move forward, to heal, to rebuild the trust that had been broken. It was a start, a fragile step toward reconciliation. Daniel felt a surge of relief, a small crack in the wall of guilt that had surrounded him. He knew they still had a long way to go, that it would take time to rebuild what they had lost, but he was willing to do whatever it took. For Laura, for Noah, for the family he wanted to protect. Days turned into weeks, and slowly the tension began to ease. Daniel made a conscious effort to be more involved, more attentive. He helped with Noah's care, taking turns with feeding, changing diapers, rocking him to sleep. He wanted to be the father Noah needed, the husband Laura could rely on. He knew he couldn't erase the past, but he could work to create a better future. Noah's first milestones became moments of healing. His first smile, the sound of his laughter, the way his tiny hand wrapped around Daniel's finger, all of it filled Daniel with a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in months. He found joy in the small moments, the simple acts of fatherhood that brought him closer to his son. Each day he felt more connected, more certain that Noah was his child, a part of him that he had almost lost. The turning point came one night as Daniel held Noah in his arms, rocking him to sleep. The baby's eyes fluttered closed, his breathing soft and steady. As Daniel looked down at his son, he felt a surge of love, a deep, unconditional bond that washed away the last remnants of doubt. This was his son, his flesh and blood, and he would do everything in his power to protect him, to be the father he deserved. Daniel knew he still had to work to regain Laura's trust, but he felt a sense of hope, a belief that they could find their way back to each other. He wanted to show her that he was committed, that he had faced his own demons and come out stronger. He wanted to prove that their family was worth fighting for, that the love they had shared was still there, waiting to be rediscovered. As he stood in Noah's nursery, the soft glow of the nightlight casting a warm light on the room, Daniel felt a sense of peace. He had made mistakes, had let his fears take control, but he had found his way back. He had found the strength to face his own insecurities, to confront the doubts that had threatened to destroy his family. He had found a new understanding of what it meant to be a father, a husband, a man. He knew the journey was far from over, that there would be more challenges ahead, but he was ready to face them. With Laura by his side and Noah in his arms, he felt a renewed sense of purpose, a belief in the future they could build together. For the first time in months, Daniel felt like he was on solid ground. He had faced the darkness, had confronted his own fears, and had come out the other side. He was ready to embrace the future, to rebuild the trust and love that had been shaken. He was ready to be the man his family needed him to be. As he watched Noah sleep, Daniel made a silent promise to love his son without reservation, to be there for him, no matter what, to guide him through life with an open heart. He promised to be a better husband to Laura, to show her every day that he loved her, that he trusted her, that he was committed to their life together. And in that quiet moment, Daniel knew that he was ready to move forward, to leave the past behind, and to embrace the future with hope and love. He had been given a second chance, and he was determined to make the most of it. For Laura, for Noah, for himself. The house had changed. It wasn't just that Laura had rearranged the furniture or added new pictures to the walls. The change was subtler, deeper. It was in the way Laura spoke to Daniel, her words measured and guarded, as if testing the waters before diving in. It was in the way she glanced at him, her eyes searching for something she couldn't quite name. Daniel felt it too, the tension that hung between them like a fog, a constant reminder of the betrayal that had driven a wedge into their marriage. Every day, Daniel woke up with the same resolve, to earn back Laura's trust, to be the husband and father he had promised to be. But as the days stretched into weeks, he realized how difficult that would be. Trust, once broken, wasn't easily mended. It was like a fragile vase that had shattered, its pieces scattered. Even when glued back together, the cracks would always remain. Daniel's attempts at reconciliation were met with mixed results. He made an effort to be more present, to engage with Laura and Noah, to show them that he was committed to their family. He cooked breakfast, took care of Noah, and tried to create moments of connection. But for every small victory, there were setbacks. Laura's smiles, once so effortless, felt strained. Her laughter, which had once filled their home, was now rare and tinged with sadness. One afternoon, as Daniel fed Noah in the kitchen, he watched Laura from the corner of his eye. She was folding laundry, her movements mechanical, her mind clearly elsewhere. He wanted to say something, to bridge the gap that had grown between them, but he didn't know how. Words felt inadequate, unable to convey the depth of his remorse and the sincerity of his intentions. Instead, Daniel focused on Noah. He had found a sense of solace in fatherhood, a new purpose that filled his days. The simple act of caring for his son brought him a peace he hadn't known before. Changing diapers, rocking Noah to sleep, feeding him. These tasks grounded him, reminding him of what was truly important. He felt a bond with Noah that was growing stronger each day, a connection that was helping to heal the wounds he had inflicted on himself and his family. Noah's milestones became the focal points of their lives. His first smile, his first laugh, his first attempt at crawling. Each moment was a step toward normalcy, a reminder of the love that had once defined their family. Daniel cherished these milestones, seeing them as small victories in his quest for redemption. He documented everything, taking photos, recording videos, wanting to capture every precious moment. It was as if by preserving these memories, he could rebuild the life he had nearly lost. As time went on, Laura began to thaw. The walls she had built around her heart started to crumble, piece by piece. She watched Daniel with Noah, saw the genuine love and care in his actions, and began to believe that maybe, just maybe, they could find their way back to each other. She noticed the effort he was making, the changes in his behavior, and felt a flicker of hope. It wasn't easy, and the pain of his betrayal still lingered, but she could see that Daniel was trying, and that counted for something. One evening, Laura found herself standing outside Noah's nursery, watching Daniel through the half-open door. He was sitting in the rocking chair, holding Noah close, singing softly. His voice was low, the words barely audible, but the tenderness in his tone was unmistakable. Laura's heart ached at the sight. She remembered the early days of their relationship, the way Daniel had held her when they first fell in love, the promises they had made. She wanted to believe that those moments could be recaptured, that they could start anew. Slowly, Laura began to let Daniel back in. It wasn't a conscious decision, but a gradual shift. She started joining him in Noah's nursery, sitting beside him as he read to their son. They began having dinner together, talking about their days, sharing the small details of their lives. It was tentative at first, like learning to walk again, but it was a start. They began to laugh together, their conversations growing more relaxed, the tension easing. The cracks were still there, but they were beginning to mend. One weekend, Daniel suggested they go through some old family photos. It was a tradition they had started when they first got married, sitting down together to reminisce about their childhoods, their families, their shared history. Daniel hoped that by revisiting those memories, they could reconnect, find common ground. He pulled out a dusty box from the attic, filled with albums and loose pictures, and set it on the living room floor. Laura joined him, and they began flipping through the albums, smiling at the images of their younger selves, their wedding day, vacations they had taken. It felt good to laugh together, to remember the good times. As they reached the bottom of the box, Laura paused. her fingers brushing against an old faded photograph. She pulled it out, her eyes widening in recognition. The photo was of a man with dark skin, standing proudly with his family. He wore a formal suit, his expression serious but kind. There was something familiar in his features, something that reminded Laura of Noah. She handed the photo to Daniel, her heart racing. "Do you remember this?" she asked softly. Daniel took the photo, his brow furrowing as he studied it. A flicker of memory passed through his mind, and he nodded slowly. "That's my great-grandfather," he said. "I remember my father showing me this picture when I was a kid. He used to tell me stories about him." Laura's eyes filled with tears. "He looks like Noah," she whispered. "The same eyes, the same expression." Daniel felt a lump form in his throat. He stared at the photo, then at Noah, who was playing with his toys on the floor. The resemblance was undeniable. He couldn't believe he hadn't seen it before. It was as if the answers had been there all along, hidden in plain sight, waiting to be discovered. A wave of emotion washed over him. Relief, guilt, love. He had doubted his wife, his son, his own family. He had let his fears blind him to the truth. But now, holding the photo in his hand, he felt a sense of clarity. Noah was a part of their family, a living connection to their past and their future. And in that moment, Daniel knew he had to let go of the doubts that had haunted him. The discovery of the photograph marked a turning point in their relationship. It was as if the pieces of their shattered vase had been carefully glued back together, the cracks still visible but no longer defining. Daniel and Laura began to talk more openly about their feelings, about the pain they had both experienced. They shared their fears, their hopes, their dreams for the future. The conversations were raw and honest, a necessary step toward healing. As they continued to explore their family history, Daniel and Laura decided to take DNA tests, curious to learn more about their heritage. The results confirmed what they had suspected, a mix of African and European ancestry, along with a surprising percentage of Asian ancestry. The revelation added a new layer to their understanding of who they were, a tapestry of cultures and backgrounds that made up their family. Daniel embraced this newfound knowledge, seeing it as a way to deepen his connection to Noah. He began reading about the regions where their ancestors had lived, learning about their traditions, their struggles, their triumphs. He shared his findings with Laura, eager to include her in this journey of discovery. Together, they began to teach Noah about his heritage, wanting him to grow up with a sense of pride in his diverse background. The more they learned, the more they realized how interconnected their family was, how the past had shaped their present. They talked about the importance of embracing their differences, of celebrating the unique qualities that made them who they were. They wanted Noah to understand that he was a part of something bigger, a rich history that stretched back generations. As they moved forward, Daniel felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in a long time. He had faced his fears, confronted his insecurities, and had come out stronger. He had learned to accept himself, his family, and the beautiful, complex tapestry that defined their lives. The doubts that had once plagued him were gone, replaced by a deep, abiding love for his wife and son. Their relationship wasn't perfect. There were still moments of tension, times when the pain of the past resurfaced, but they had learned to navigate those moments, to communicate openly, to lean on each other for support. They had built a foundation of trust, a commitment to their family that was stronger than ever. The photo of Daniel's great-grandfather found a new home in Noah's nursery, a reminder of the legacy they carried. It was a symbol of the journey they had taken, the obstacles they had overcome, and the love that had endured. Every time Daniel looked at the photo, he felt a surge of gratitude for the life they were building, for the second chance they had been given. And as he watched Noah grow, Daniel knew that they were creating a future filled with love, acceptance, and understanding. They were a family, united by their shared history, and nothing could ever change that. In the months following the discovery of Daniel's great-grandfather's photograph, a new chapter began to unfold in the life of the family. The photo had become more than just an image. It was a catalyst for a deeper exploration into their identity. For Daniel and Laura, it was an opportunity to reshape their understanding of themselves, their heritage, and the world they were building for Noah. The revelation of their diverse ancestry fueled Daniel's desire to know more about his roots. He found himself drawn to the stories of his ancestors, wanting to learn about the people who had come before him, whose lives had intertwined to bring him to where he was. He began to see his family as part of a larger narrative, a tapestry woven together with threads of different cultures, histories, and experiences. Laura shared Daniel's enthusiasm. She had always been proud of their family's diversity, but now she felt a renewed sense of purpose in embracing it. She wanted Noah to grow up with a strong sense of identity, to understand that his dark skin was not something to question, but something to celebrate. Together, they decided to delve deeper into their family's past, to uncover the stories that had shaped them. They started by looking through old family records, birth certificates, marriage licenses, and photographs. Each document was a piece of the puzzle, revealing glimpses into the lives of their ancestors. Daniel and Laura spent evenings poring over these records, piecing together the history of their family tree. They found stories of resilience and courage, of people who had crossed oceans and continents, who had faced hardships and built new lives. Each discovery brought them closer to understanding the legacy that had been passed down to them. Noah, still too young to fully grasp the complexities of their research, was a constant presence in their journey. They included him in their exploration, showing him the photographs, telling him the stories in a way that he could understand. They wanted him to feel connected to his heritage, to know that he was part of something larger than himself. Even if he didn't fully understand, they hoped that these moments would lay the foundation for his own sense of identity. Their exploration took a more formal turn when they decided to take DNA tests. The results had already shown the blend of African and European ancestry they had expected, but the presence of significant Asian heritage had come as a surprise. Daniel and Laura were intrigued, wanting to learn more about this unexpected aspect of their background. It felt like a new door had opened, inviting them to explore a part of their heritage they had never considered. With the results in hand, they began researching the regions identified in the DNA test. They read about the cultures, traditions, and histories of these areas, eager to understand the connections that tied them to this new branch of their family tree. Daniel spent hours online, reading articles, watching documentaries, and even reaching out to online communities focused on genealogy and ancestry. The more he learned, the more fascinated he became. The story of his family was richer and more complex than he had ever imagined. One day, as they sat in the living room, surrounded by books and papers, Daniel turned to Laura. "I want to do more than just read about our ancestry," he said, his voice filled with determination. "I want to experience it. I want to see where our ancestors came from, to connect with the places and people that are part of our history." Laura looked at him, her eyes thoughtful. She had seen the change in Daniel over the past few months, the way he had thrown himself into this journey of discovery. She knew it was his way of making amends, of finding a deeper connection with Noah, with her, and with himself. "What are you thinking?" she asked, curious about the next step he was considering. "I think we should plan a trip," Daniel said, his eyes alight with excitement. "I want to visit the places our DNA test identified. I want to learn firsthand about our heritage, to see the cultures that are part of our family. And I want to take Noah with us, so he can experience it too." Laura felt a surge of emotion at Daniel's words. She had always valued the importance of family and tradition, and the idea of exploring their heritage together filled her with a sense of anticipation. "I think that's a wonderful idea," well, she said, smiling. "It would be a great way for us to connect with our past and build memories for the future." They began planning their trip, deciding to start with a visit to regions in Asia that were highlighted in their DNA results. They researched cities and towns, looking for places that held historical significance to their ancestry. They reached out to local historians and community groups, hoping to find connections and learn more about the lives of their ancestors. As the plans took shape, Daniel felt a sense of purpose that had been missing for so long. He was doing something meaningful, something that would bring his family closer together. The trip wasn't just about learning facts. It was about understanding who they were and where they came from. It was about embracing their heritage and teaching Noah to be proud of the diverse blood that ran through his veins. The trip itself was a revelation. Traveling to Asia, Daniel and Laura were immersed in cultures that were both familiar and foreign. They walked through bustling markets, visited ancient temples, and spoke with locals who shared stories of their history. They saw the influences of their own features reflected in the faces around them, the same eyes, the same expressions. It was a powerful experience, one that brought them closer to their ancestors and to each other. Noah, even at his young age, was fascinated by the new sights and sounds. He marveled at the colorful festivals, the vibrant clothing, the different languages he heard. He was curious, asking questions, wanting to understand. Daniel and Laura took turns explaining things to him, enjoying the way his eyes lit up with wonder. They felt a deep satisfaction in knowing that they were giving him a gift, a connection to his past that would shape his future. One afternoon, they visited a small village that had been home to some of their ancestors. They walked through narrow streets, lined with old houses and gardens. An elderly woman approached them, recognizing their curiosity. She invited them into her home, offering tea and conversation. Through their interpreter, they learned that her family had lived in the village for generations, that they were part of a lineage that stretched back centuries. As they sat in the woman's home, listening to her stories, Daniel felt a sense of belonging he hadn't expected. It was as if he had found a missing piece of himself, a connection that had always been there, waiting to be discovered. He looked at Laura, seeing the same emotions reflected in her eyes. They were part of this place, part of this history. It wasn't just about blood or DNA. It was about the shared experiences that connected them across time and space. When they returned home from their trip, Daniel and Laura felt a renewed sense of purpose. They had seen the places where their ancestors had lived, had walked in their footsteps, had felt the weight of their history. They wanted to continue this journey, to learn more, to pass on the knowledge to Noah. They started attending cultural events, learning traditional dances, cooking recipes that had been passed down through generations. They wanted to keep the spirit of their heritage alive, to celebrate the diversity that defined them. Their newfound appreciation for their heritage brought them closer as a family. They talked openly about their experiences, sharing their thoughts and feelings. They encouraged Noah to be curious, to ask questions, to explore his identity. They wanted him to grow up with a strong sense of self, to understand that he was part of a rich, diverse family that valued love and acceptance above all else. As the years went by, Noah's curiosity only grew. He loved hearing stories about his great-grandfather, about the ancestors who had traveled across oceans to start new lives. He felt a sense of pride in his heritage, in the complexity of his background. He understood that he was a blend of different cultures, that his identity was unique, and he knew that his parents had worked hard to give him that understanding, to make him feel connected to his roots. One day, Noah approached Daniel with a request. He had been learning about family history in school and wanted to take part in a heritage project. He asked if they could create a family tree, complete with photos and stories. Daniel was thrilled by Noah's enthusiasm and agreed immediately. They spent weekends together, gathering information, interviewing relatives, and piecing together their family tree. It became a labor of love, a way for them to bond and learn more about who they were. As they worked on the project, Daniel felt a deep sense of fulfillment. He had come full circle, from a man who had doubted his own child's heritage to a father who embraced his family's diversity with open arms. He had learned to see the beauty in their differences, to celebrate the unique qualities that made them who they were. He had learned that family was not defined by appearance, but by the love and connection they shared. Their family tree grew, filling with names and faces, with stories and memories. It was a living testament to the journey they had taken, the obstacles they had overcome, and the love that had sustained them. Each branch represented a part of their history, a piece of the puzzle that made up their identity. And at the center of it all was Noah, the child who had brought them together, who had taught them the importance of embracing their true selves. As they finished the project, Daniel looked at the completed family tree, a sense of pride swelling in his chest. They had created something beautiful, something that honored their past and looked toward the future. He glanced at Noah, who was beaming with pride, his eyes shining with excitement. Daniel knew that they had given him a gift, a foundation of understanding and love that would carry him through life. In that moment, Daniel felt a deep sense of peace. He had faced his fears, had confronted his own biases, and had emerged stronger. He had learned to value the things that truly mattered, to appreciate the richness of their shared history. He had found a sense of belonging, not just in his family, but in the world. He knew that they would continue to grow, to learn, to celebrate their heritage together. And as they stood before the family tree, Daniel felt a sense of gratitude for the journey they had taken. It had not been easy, but it had brought them to where they were, a family united by love and understanding. They had found their way back to each other, had embraced their true selves, and had built a future filled with hope and joy. For Daniel, Laura, and Noah, the journey of self-discovery was ongoing. There were still stories to uncover, still places to explore, still lessons to learn. But they faced the future with confidence, knowing that they were rooted in a strong foundation of love and acceptance. They were a family, bound together by the threads of their history, and nothing could ever change that. As Noah grew older, the stories of his heritage became more than just bedtime tales. They became a vital part of his identity, shaping his understanding of who he was and where he came from. The family tree project he had completed with Daniel sparked a lifelong curiosity in him, a desire to learn more about the diverse backgrounds that made up his lineage. For Noah, his identity was a source of pride, a mosaic of cultures that he wanted to explore and understand. By the time Noah entered his teenage years, his interest in his heritage had only deepened. He was particularly drawn to the Asian ancestry that had been such a surprising discovery for his family. The stories of his ancestors who had lived in far-off lands, who had carried their traditions and customs across generations, fascinated him. He spent hours reading about the history and culture of the regions where his family had roots, absorbing everything he could. But as Noah navigated the complexities of adolescence, his journey of self-discovery became more challenging. He was the only one in his immediate family with darker skin, a fact that sometimes made him feel different, even within his own home. At school, he occasionally encountered questions and comments from his peers that reminded him of his uniqueness. While most of the time these remarks were innocent, they still stung, leaving him feeling isolated and uncertain about his place in the world. Daniel and Laura noticed the changes in Noah. They saw how his once boundless curiosity was sometimes tinged with doubt, how the confident boy they had raised was beginning to question his identity. They knew that Noah was struggling to reconcile the different aspects of his heritage, trying to find a place where he truly belonged, and they were determined to support him through this journey, just as they had supported each other. One day after a particularly tough day at school, Noah came home with a heavy heart. He had been the subject of a casual remark about his skin color, a comment that had been meant as a joke, but it cut deeper than the speaker realized. Noah had laughed it off in the moment, but the words had lingered with him, echoing in his mind as he walked home. When he arrived, Daniel was in the garage working on an old car that he and Noah had been fixing up together. The project had been a bonding activity for them, a way to spend time together and share a common interest. But today, Noah felt too weighed down by his thoughts to join in. Daniel noticed Noah's quiet demeanor as soon as he walked in. He set down his tools and turned to his son, his heart sinking as he saw the sadness in Noah's eyes. He had always feared this moment, the day when Noah would start to question himself, to feel the weight of being different. Daniel wanted to protect his son from the harsh realities of the world, but he knew that he couldn't shield him from everything. "What's on your mind, Noah?" Daniel asked gently, leaning against the car. He knew that Noah needed to talk, that whatever was bothering him wouldn't go away on its own. Noah hesitated for a moment, then finally spoke. He told Daniel about what had happened at school, about the comment that had been made, and how it had made him feel. He spoke about his frustration, his sense of not quite fitting in, even within his own family. "Sometimes I just feel different," Noah said quietly, "like I don't really belong anywhere." Daniel's heart ached for his son. He understood Noah's feelings all too well, having gone through his own struggles with identity and belonging. He knew that Noah's journey was his own, that he had to find his own path, but he also knew that he could offer guidance, support, and love. Over the next few weeks, Daniel and Laura made a conscious effort to talk more openly with Noah about his feelings. They encouraged him to share his thoughts, to express his doubts and fears. They wanted him to know that it was okay to feel different, that it was okay to question things. They reminded him of the strength and resilience that came from their diverse heritage, and how those qualities were part of who he was. Noah listened to his parents, appreciating their support, but he still felt a deep need to find his own answers. He wanted to understand more about his heritage, to connect with the cultures that had shaped his identity. He began to explore different ways of doing this, whether it was through reading, learning new languages, or participating in cultural events. He sought out mentors who could help him navigate this journey, people who had faced similar challenges and could offer wisdom from their own experiences. As Noah's understanding of his heritage deepened, so did his confidence. He began to see his differences not as a burden, but as a source of strength. He realized that his unique background gave him a perspective that others might not have, and that was something to be proud of. He became more involved in his school's diversity and inclusion efforts, using his voice to advocate for others who felt out of place. He wanted to create a community where everyone felt like they belonged, regardless of their background. By the time Noah was preparing to graduate from high school, he had grown into a confident, self-assured young man. His journey of self-discovery had not been easy, but it had shaped him in ways that made him stronger and more empathetic. He had learned to embrace all aspects of his identity, understanding that he was a product of many different cultures and traditions. He was no longer just a reflection of his parents or his ancestors. He was his own person, with a unique identity that he carried with pride. When graduation day arrived, Daniel and Laura watched with tears in their eyes as Noah walked across the stage to receive his diploma. They had seen their son grow from a curious child into a thoughtful and confident young man, and they couldn't have been prouder. They knew that his journey was far from over, but they were confident that he was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. After the ceremony, the family gathered to celebrate. Noah's siblings surrounded him, their laughter filling the room. Daniel took a moment to pull Noah aside, wanting to share a few words with his son before the day ended. "I'm so proud of you, Noah," Daniel said, his voice thick with emotion. "You've grown into an incredible young man. You've faced challenges that most people can't even imagine, and you've come through them stronger. I know you're going to do amazing things in this world." Noah smiled, feeling the weight of his father's words. "Thanks, Dad," he said simply. "I couldn't have done it without you and Mom." Daniel shook his head, a tear slipping down his cheek. "No, Noah, you did this. You found your way, you embraced who you are, and you've become someone I'm proud to call my son." That summer, Noah made a decision that surprised and delighted his parents. He had been accepted into a prestigious university, but instead of heading straight there, he wanted to take a gap year to travel. He wanted to visit the places where his ancestors had lived, to immerse himself in the cultures that were a part of him. It was a journey he had been preparing for, a way to continue his exploration of identity and belonging. Daniel and Laura were supportive, understanding the importance of this journey for Noah. They helped him plan his trip, offering advice and encouragement. They knew that this was more than just a trip. It was a continuation of the journey they had all started together. It was a way for Noah to connect with his past, to solidify his sense of self before stepping into the next chapter of his life. As Noah prepared to leave, the family gathered to see him off. They knew it would be hard to say goodbye, even if only for a year, but they were excited for the adventure that lay ahead of him. Daniel felt a mix of pride and sadness as he watched his son pack his bags, knowing that this was the moment they had been preparing for all along. As Noah drove away, Daniel and Laura stood together, watching until he disappeared from view. They felt a deep sense of satisfaction, knowing that they had given Noah the tools he needed to navigate the world. They had faced their own struggles, their own doubts, but they had come through them stronger as a family. And now, as they stood on the threshold of a new chapter, they knew that their bond was unbreakable. The house felt quieter without Noah's presence, but it was filled with the echoes of the journey they had taken together. Daniel often found himself in Noah's room, surrounded by the remnants of his childhood, reflecting on the path they had walked. He knew that life would continue to bring challenges, but he felt prepared to face them, armed with the lessons he had learned and the love of his family. As the months passed, Noah sent letters and photos from his travels. He wrote about the places he visited, the people he met, and the connections he felt with his heritage. Each letter was a reminder of the journey they had started together, a journey that was now his own. For Daniel, Laura, and Noah, their story was one of resilience, love, and the courage to face the unknown. They had found their way back to each other, had embraced their true selves, and had built a future filled with hope and joy. They were a family, united by their shared journey, and nothing could ever change that. I hope you loved the story. The next video is just a click away, so don't forget to subscribe, like, and turn on notifications. A big thanks, and see you in the next story.